What point does technology stop serving people and start shaping them?
There will always be a human element to AI.
Do you think schools are addicted to progress even when it burns out the people driving it?
Bill brings 18 years in public education with a mission to make tech in K-12 purposeful, humane, and rooted in real digital literacy.
Do you ever see a world where AI completely takes over the human element?
No, we want a human at the front.
It's not going away, it's going to stay forever. At what point does technology stop serving people and start shaping them?
Well, Tyler, I think that's definitely the question because we are so adaptive to it right now. It's always in our hands. It serves so many day-to-day functions that it is shaping and rewiring our brains, to be honest, in terms of using it all the time. So that's why there has to be a balance. But from modeling from adults, from classroom educators to everybody down, our kids and our students see us with it in our hands. So it's hard for them to determine what is right, what is wrong, what is a relationship with when we call AI a thought partner. They're our friend. So that's the ultimate question, is how are we getting to the point of being able to critically think? And I think there's no answers right now other than looking at that balance and being able to determine what we're looking at moving forward, because there's not a lot of studies out there on how to do it. We know we need to do it, but the question is how.
With there not being a lot out there, people are doing so much to try to learn, so much to try to take action. Do you think schools are addicted to progress even when it burns out the people driving it?
I would say that there's an entry point here where, especially in the AI era, I guess we're talking generally just about burnout, because there's just so much being thrown at our school staff on day to day, from being caregivers to being obviously the educator in the classroom. But in this case, trying to keep on top of something that's evolving so fast is really hard for our classroom educators to get the time for professional development, professional learning, when supply occasional teachers to come in and release them aren't there as well. So as soon as they actually get a time that is booked, 2 months in advance, based on priorities of a school district or a ministry, by the time they get there, it's already changed. And so how do we give the tools to our school staff to feel comfortable in something that is ever evolving so that they can feel comfortable talking about it in the classroom?
If empathy could be coded, what line of code would you write first?
Humans first. I think everything has to be looked through the lens of a human, and big thing is whether it's online or offline. But the biggest question is, why does your behavior change when it goes online to the extent where anonymity allows you to creep into the areas that you would never do face to face with a human? So those core values that we're teaching through just day-to-day empathy, whether it's just treating others with respect, the whole golden rule, treat others how you'd want to be treated, has to flow through on that line. But what's that discerning value, and what does it mean when my generation, our generation, who grew up with the ability to know what it was without tech, in most cases, to balance that with what we do with tech now, where the generations that are growing up now just don't know anything other.
3, 2, 1.
This is Grounded Moments, where wisdom meets purpose. And Bill, let's start with what grounds you. You shared this quote from Desmond, is it Tutu?
Yeah, Desmond Tutu.
There comes a point where we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. What does going upstream look like for you in today's educational world?
Well, from leveraging digital from a technology standpoint, it's trying to, I guess, jump ahead 5 years, which is extremely difficult in this field, especially from a technology standpoint and the world changing. But right now we're battling a lot of items that are currently happening, and we absolutely need to be able to do that, to equip. We can't just ignore it. We have to face it. But if we don't look ahead with research, if we don't look ahead with intentionality into the areas of mental health, in terms of addictions, in terms of just using technology for what it is, or of course take it out of technology, how do we stop it from happening in the first place? And so that's what going upriver looks like to me, is trying to say, okay, using those elements of being able to figure out why this is occurring and how to stop it, as opposed to reacting. We need to be responsive.
What do you think most leaders get wrong about what's causing people to fall in?
I think that we naturally, and this is not against any leader, I would be in this one, you're trying to look at in the moment, in the short term. I think you have to justify to anybody, whether it's parents, whether it's your staff, whether it's your students or your own co-workers, to identify what the needs are in the moment. And then how do you balance that with looking 5 years out? It's extremely hard in any field. But to say that we are going to put our resources in a certain area and justify it because the ends justify the means is what we need to, I think, try to figure out in there. I'm not sure what percentage it is of our time, but I do know that we need to try to figure it out, because everybody that I speak to, everybody that I hear, we talk about these foundational elements of critical thinking, of digital literacy, of different aspects of just being better humans, and we're trying to fight the battle now. But what does it look like in the future, and how do we put our end goals and point our arrows towards it?
And that was actually going to be my next question, is how do we find the balance between dealing with the short term and trying to work towards the end goal?
Well, I think a lot of school districts and school boards, again, from the education perspective, is just that I've heard such good stories about getting back to nature, getting back to being one, to understanding the why in the moment. Why does our brain go to not get into deep sleep if we are looking at a phone right before bedtime for an hour? Like, that blue light has an impact on us to be able to say, okay, we're going to get less REM sleep if we do it. So I think a lot of it's understanding, sharing the why are we trying to do this, putting in those items that I think the students and the children can look at, because the partnership with the parents is huge. And I think that's a big next step, as well as, like, how do we find the time to share this learning with parents who care and caregivers that care, but at the same time, how do we get to them as a school board?
Do you have an idea to an answer for that?
Well, partnerships with the parents' associations is first. I've seen lots of school boards that have been doing it well, but ultimately in an evening activity, which is of course volunteer basis, or a school council or parent council meeting, they're not as well attended. And so despite using that as an avenue, you're only hitting a subsection of what it is. So there are great parents associations who are very active, and then ones that are waiting for responsive sharing. So I think that is the next step a lot of the school boards are taking, and districts are taking, to try to say, how do we engage parents so that they can support at home, which has always been the case curricular wise, but now it's like, okay, tech is almost a reward for a lot of the kids, but how do they understand? And
Yeah. One of the things that I talk about a lot is if you want to see something happen, you have to make it a part of conversation.
Yeah.
And so if we want to increase parent engagement, we need to talk about parent engagement, and schools need to talk about parent engagement on their social medias and how they communicate with parents. It shouldn't just be, here's what happened at school today, I have to report this to you. It should be, here's a parent engagement opportunity. Here's another parent engagement opportunity, in an attempt to try to let parents know they have a right to be involved. Because I also think there's a bit of unknown with parents where they don't actually know yet what level of involvement they can take in that process. Because we have to remember that we've been teachers or educators or on the board maybe for several years, but it's their first time potentially as a parent with a kid in grade 1. And so they don't know exactly what they can do. If you could rebuild one upstream system in schools right now, Bill, what would it be and why?
I would say, from a structural standpoint, school boards that have an IT department sitting over on one side and a curricular department sitting on the other, student success, merging those where they're sitting in. Obviously, they're not going to be experts in the area of the IT, but having somebody who is an educator in there can learn what, privacy and security and everything has to be around. Like, you have to understand that and justify that to your colleagues, but at the same time, the decisions that are being made have to work from that standpoint. And then likewise, that coherence across the school board, where where you're talking about being able to talk about all these items, but it can't be on three people at a district either. It has to be organizationally that you're hearing these words from every single person that is part of it, including school staff, including principals, so that if a parent is asking, if a teacher or educator is asking, then we are able to give those answers, because three people in one bubble is not organizationally, it is a piece of the puzzle.
And the key to that would be finding a way to bring all of those central office figures into a common space, but also still protecting their workload and the things that they deal with that's specific or confidential even to their own department. How do you reach that point of bolstering their ability to communicate with each other without simply just removing all their offices, putting them in the same room and saying, you now all work in one space?
I will backtrack a little bit. My role at the Ottawa Catholic School Board, I was a coordinator of learning technologies. And I think it's all about intentionality and culture, of course. The ability to say, okay, every 2 months we're going to bring every front-facing educator staff that is centrally appointed to our boardroom in this case, or a central place, and we are going to talk about topics that are pertain to everybody, where they can use their professional judgment and portfolios to say, how are we going to flow this through it? So it's not always about technology. It could be about equity. It could be about anything. So I think that's one piece of it. Meeting with all the leaders regularly, monthly, to be able to disseminate and discern that out to their groups and bring it back the next month is huge. And I think it ultimately starts at the top as well. We talk about ground up, we talk about top down leadership, and obviously leadership in the middle, and all those still have to occur, but you have to have that modeling from the top of your organization, including the permission to be innovative, and then modeling it themselves about being out there and being open to change.
And one of the things that I've heard is we talk about the 30,000 foot view of what this would look like. And when we hear that top down, bottom up, a lot of people think right to CEO, superintendent board, to students and parents at the bottom. But what we often forget is when we zoom in from that 30,000 foot view, there's still a top down, bottom up, even in central office, and what that looks like. And so with that, it's really important to know that modeling at the top is always, you're always at the top at some point. And you always have to consider where that top is. But you also have to recognize, depending on the place you're in, there's a bottom with you as well. And so to recognize that there's a 30,000 foot view and then a close in view, I think is really important. Alchemists, if you're listening, you're probably wondering, where did the game go after Grounded Moments? Well, I moved it right to the end of Grounded Moments. And so, Bill, we're going to play our first game today. And this game is called Principle or Preference. I'm going to give you 10 statements that either spark some conviction, maybe debate, and all you have to do is tell me if this statement is a principle, something core, near and dear that everybody should be considering to adopt, or if it's a preference, meaning it's okay if not everybody takes it on. Ready to give it a try?
Absolutely.
All right, principle or preference innovation should start with empathy.
Oh, principle. Absolutely.
Digital wellness belongs in every curriculum.
Principle.
AI can amplify creativity more than it replaces it.
Principle.
Culture designs matters more than strategic design.
Absolutely. Principle.
Every educator is a designer.
Yes, absolutely. Principle.
Reflection beats reaction every time.
Depending on situation, I'll say it's, I won't continue the trend on that one.
I was waiting
depending on the
for that.
situation, throwing it there.
There we go. Systems should adapt to people, not the other way around.
Principle. In principle.
In principle. Okay. Storytelling is a strategy and not a soft skill.
Principle.
The future belongs to those who unlearn fast.
Absolutely.
And technology should make humans more human, not more efficient.
100% principle.
Okay, systems should adapt to people is in principle. What do we mean by that?
Well, I think, can you rephrase it? Because there was a piece I picked up. Can you take the whole statement
Yeah,
again?
it was just systems should adapt to people, not the other way around.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that obviously ground up organic pieces should drive system change, but it can't be the only driver. And I think there has to be, leadership from the top and the middle that allows that to occur, which is whether it's conditions so that people have the voice to bring it forward. So I think in my mind, I was unpacking it not to dismiss that absolutely our staff should and our students should drive change, but without the right direction, without the right leadership pointing that, driving the ship, I guess, I think it could be fallen into a trap where it really wouldn't matter if it's not going to be receptive or being brought into the vision of the organization.
And that kind of leads to my next question here, because I would answer that as a preference for me.
Yeah.
Systems should adapt to people. Well, what you run the risk of is bringing in bad people, if that's your philosophy. So I'm wondering if you agree with to what extent should a system adapt to a person versus saying you're not the right fit for the system.
Well, that's right. And I think that's where the sort of quotation in principle means. So I definitely would say that, I guess, in hindsight, the preference is there because in principle it's good, but it can be a bad thing too. So I think there's always, you have to have that culture. You have to be able to listen and discern, but you can't be driven solely by one aspect of your organization. You have to have that ability to adapt to what is being brought forward to you and use and be true. I think you have to be true. If organizations that flip-flop just by every daily I guess occurrence or every feedback cycle they get from everybody will be confusing in its leadership. So you do have to hold true to some pillars that the organization brings through and the leadership brings through, but knowing that people feel respected to bring there and that they are heard, not just heard because of what you listen to them, but heard because after it, and it can take years. That's the problem, is that sometimes it takes years to bring it into the fold.
And there's a difference between flip-flopping between things and trying new things to seek continuous improvement. And what we would hope that divisions, teachers, principals, other leaders are doing is they're seeking continuous improvement and they're not afraid to try something to try to improve. What we don't want to have is we're taking this stance, flipping to this stance, flipping to this stance, flipping to this stance, because it's very different, it's very confusing, and like you said, it can cause chaos, disruption, and that can actually promote burnout more so than the workload of a job itself, is not knowing the vision, the mission, the why behind why everyone's doing things. Next one that we're going to do here is we are going to play one more game under Grounded Moments that'll lead to a final question. And this is a game that hasn't aired live yet. I've done a few recordings of it, but and it's gone quite well. So I want to give it another try. I'm going to take 2 minutes to try to guess your very first job, Bill. So what I need you to do is think of the first job you ever had. It had to earn some kind of a pay, but it didn't have to necessarily be super official. And I try to limit myself to yes or no questions here. We'll see if I can get it in 2 minutes. So do you have that job in mind?
Yes.
Okay. 2 minutes on the clock. Yes or no questions. I'm going to try to stick to that. Here we go. Did you have to clock in for your job?
Yes.
Were you on your feet most of the day?
Yes.
Did you use equipment or tools?
No.
Was safety gear required?
No.
Did teamwork matter, or was it more? Sorry, I can't ask yes or no. Or it has to be yes or no. Did teamwork matter?
No.
Did you serve people?
Yes.
Okay. Was it indoors?
Yes.
Did you work with kids or families? Kids or
Yes.
adults, I should say.
Work with or for? With,
Okay.
no.
So you worked for them. Was smiling a part of what you had to do on your job?
Yes.
Did you ever handle complaints?
Yes.
Was a boss nearby most of the time?
No.
Hourly pay or salary?
Hourly.
Was it minimum wage?
Yes.
Did you get an employee discount?
Yes.
Was pay based on tips or commission?
No.
Oh man, that totally threw me off.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to get you, I think, because it's kind of a niche.
Did it involve food?
Yes.
Was it for a corporation?
Yes.
Was music always playing in the background?
No.
Okay. Did weather affect your work?
No.
Was it, and okay, mostly indoors. Did you have repeat customers?
Yes.
Okay, I've got about 10 seconds left, and the best guess that I'm going to come up with is you served ice cream at like a indoor ice cream shop.
You know what? It was tricky. I'm not sure how many people would visualize it. Can I share the answer now?
Absolutely, you can share the answer.
So there's two things that concurrently. So one was, working at a summer camp, which was right up the alley. But my actual first one was working at the local hockey rink for our junior team here in Ottawa. And I walked around. We used to call them a hawker, but I'm not sure, where you used to, sell the like pop and drinks and soda. So I'd walk around and sell those, in that case, like not bottled drinks, and to patrons that were watching the hockey game.
There we go.
No, you weren't getting. Yeah, you were on the right track.
That's unique.
Yeah.
And you know what? I thought, because my head went to, you're on your feet, you're working with people, there's sometimes food involved. I thought I was gonna say you're one of the people that walks up and down baseball games yelling beer.
Absolutely,
here,
good connection.
but I was like, you're way too young to probably serve alcohol, so I wrote that one completely out of my mind.
Yeah.
What I want to know is, what did that first job teach you about leadership?
Oh, so many. I think that one is just resilience. Being your first job, you don't know if you're doing it right, and there's so many times that even though the concept of what you were doing was simple in hindsight, in the moment it felt like Mount Everest. And especially when it was already pre-filled in cups, you were worried about it, not being cold anymore, and the ice melting and the customer satisfaction that would get to it. And for me, I actually, being on this podcast, being an educator, people would never guess that I was an introvert, and as an introvert as a child, where I didn't want to do any public speaking. So the idea of going around and trying to interact, being on, I guess, having to do the mental math, which I could do, but under pressure of, 5 people looking at you, making those decisions. So those intangibles that it was in terms of making those relationships, people first, like you mentioned, smile, right? Did you have to smile? Of course you did. You wanted to, be a positive experience for the people.
I relate to that so much because it wasn't my first job, but I did work at a Cineplex movie theater, and there was definitely a different feeling from when my job was to go in and sweep the theater after a movie was done, and when I worked concession. Because when I worked concession, I could have the simplest calculation, and yet I would still use the till calculator to figure out how much somebody owed me and how much I was giving them back in change. Because like you just said, there's that added level of stress to it. So as an introvert, as somebody who put on maybe a front at the first when they worked with those people, how did you get through it?
I think what is a strength for me, and also can be down, is my stubbornness. I wouldn't allow myself to be overrun by my nervousness, my stress, to be a people pleaser, and that's what I want to do. I want to value every human to that piece, and I internalize their stress. Now, in the moment at a hockey game, it's a bit different in the moment, but you can internalize their maybe annoyance, whereas day to day. So I think that idea of being able to say, okay, I'm going to take this, I'm going to learn from it, but it's not going to overwhelm me. It was a learning curve because it was a struggle. Like I said, in hindsight, when we feel, in the moment, it was so huge. Now what you learned and what you can apply to your daily life is definitely beneficial.
And it's so important to acknowledge in that not all stress is bad and not all nervousness is related to having anxiety. And both of those terms can actually be very beneficial to your personal growth and a team's growth if you're willing to live with a little bit of stress and a little bit of nervousness. It just means that you care about what you're doing. And with that, we're going to talk about the adversity that we face, and it's going to bring about our next elemental segment. Let's get into headwinds and tailwinds. Let's lean into the turbulence. And we're going to start with a game on this one here, Bill. This is the hot seat. So in 10 seconds or less, your gut reaction only, I need to know what your first step would be for each scenario, okay?
Okay.
A school resists change despite clear evidence it's needed.
Sit down with leadership, have a conversation, start bringing it back as a partner in thought.
Your big idea gets dismissed as too idealistic.
Continue conversations, bring it back, revisit. Hope a listening and learning stance comes from it.
Your workshop tech crashes mid-session.
Acknowledging that this is going to happen. Try not to throw tech under the bus, but realizing that it's a balance.
The innovation team burns out halfway through a project.
Well, I think it's just asking why. What conditions were they put in that allowed them to burn out, and what can we do different?
And a respected colleague fears being replaced by AI.
I think it's looking at the humanistic piece and what they're fearful of, and how there'll always be a human element to AI.
Do you ever see a world where AI completely takes over the human element?
I think if you look at the concept of where AI as a word and going into the evolution of it, where we're at in generative AI in that stance, no. I think is there a possibility where you're looking 5-10 years down the road where the intelligence of the AI becomes more, I guess, adaptive? But for me, no. We've asked students in our school district, school board, should it ever change, the aspect of having a teacher at the front of the room, and they wholeheartedly said, no, we want a human at the front.
So about 10 years away, your prediction from when AI can begin to think back on itself and re-engage in conversations with its own memory to continuously just generate.
Yeah, I think if you look at the models, there is the ability to say if it continues on this path, when does it become more neural than it does? And I don't anticipate it would be anything that will obviously take over the world, but I think what obviously it can do, we're only at the tip of the iceberg for where I think researchers and engineers and everything want to do it. So I don't foresee like we're at the generative AI or getting into the agentic AI right now, kind of seeing where does that take the human out of it, because it's processing and doing workloads without the human there. So it's not becoming the human brain, but in that case, it's taking the human out of the center.
And let's hope that I think it was The Simpsons. Let's hope they're wrong on this one, because wasn't it many years ago? Was it the HAL 5000? It was like a red dot in the middle of a classroom that was tormenting. Do you know what I'm talking about when I say that?
Yes, I can connect with it. I'm so glad that I have a Simpsons reference for today early on. It's awesome.
There we go. And, they've been right about a few things, so let's hope they're wrong on that one.
Yeah.
Bill, when tech evolves faster than people, what kind of resistance do you see first? Fear, fatigue, ego, something else?
To me, and I'm generalizing because I have utmost respect for my colleagues, to me it has nothing to do with tech. The ability to be innovative and kind of forward thinking existed way before tech, on what the students in their classroom were trying to do, what you were allowing them to do, how you were going to kind of push the envelope as to what that looks like in classroom, from the straight desks to the teacher, being that central figure at the top, at the front, I should say. And it's always important. Like, there's always parts of the process where the teacher is going to speak more than the students, especially at the beginning of a unit or concept. But then how do we gradually release that and ultimately look at what the outputs are from the students? So I think within that's a generic way of thinking. And if we look at technology as a tool, I know people would say, well, it's a really powerful tool, or they'll really go down on the vernacular of what a tool is and why the technology is different. To me, there's always the people that have been innovative, that have been, at the forefront, that were willing to jump in regardless. That's a mentality, a mindset. That sort of, if we look at the bell curve, you kind of the people in the middle that are you can nudge over through those team meetings, through those PLCs, professional learning. But I find that the gap of confidence, at least in the technology, is so wide now, maybe stemming from the pandemic, that, I think it's almost not a willingness thing. It's almost too far-fetched to be able to jump in when it's iterated so many times. But at the same time, I'll say it like this. Our school board that I recently worked at was a Google board. Oh, in the last 10 years, we've had it as our main communication system, Google Drive. If you look at Google as a whole, it hasn't changed in concept that much. Gmail, Docs, some of the functions have, and of course AI jumping in there. But to say that, Google's a new tool is the same type of people who are saying that, okay, well, we jumped in right away and started using the comment feature, and now we're allowing students to lead their learning, and I'm not telling them what to do. So I think for me, it's not necessarily a tech thing. It's not necessarily a negative thing on the human, but like, how do we give them permission? How do we get them to jump in and find? And sometimes it's just the time to do it too.
And of course, it'll be Google that comes in and says, we're a new tool, we're redesigned.
Yeah.
And, they've added a couple of things and they've just packaged it nicely to sell more of its product to the world.
Yeah.
There's
exactly.
something really powerful in the conversation you just shared. And it's that, and I would take the belief that people don't resist that tech evolution, but they definitely feel overwhelmed because people will discover new ways, new AIs, new tech, new features on how to do things, and instantly want to share it at that PLC, instantly want to share it as a part of their next keynote or in their next board meeting. How do we go about accepting that as a way for that continuous improvement and growth versus keeping it simple and focusing on what we should align with?
Very similar to like whether it's the 6 competencies, there's 21st century learning skills, different things, whether it's communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity. In my way of thinking to that statement, it's really about saying, okay, well, how do we give the skill sets to the educators, to the staff, to our students, so when that software does change, it will change, and sometimes it will deprecate, to say I can use this thinking in a different software. So when we're tools training, I totally get that sometimes you need to take it and unpack it and go into something for half an hour, and really understand the layout, and that can be overwhelming. But when it's conceptual based, when it's concept based, and you're saying, okay, now we're going to use this tool instead of that tool, there's a little bit learning for a new tool, but the idea of what we're going to get the students to use it with or the staff to use it with is changed. So I think that's where you have to head to and say, okay, these are the type of thinkings we're using with the tool, and I don't have to be the primary knowledge keeper of how to use it and everything. I just need to know about it, know that it's safe and secure in terms of privacy, and then as well know that I'm allowed to use it, and that kind of goes into the district level. But that permission piece and that way of thinking has to be adaptive.
And Bill, you've spoken a bit about your journey here. How has it shaped the way you lead through adversity?
Well, I think there's multiple angles to that. And for me, I've always been even keel. So if somebody is really heated at me, I'm going to be speaking the same way and looking the same way as I am now, talking to you calmly. And I think that it kind of goes back to my original thought about how I'm so focused in my head about trying to ensure that the other person can be calm, can be heard, can be cared for. So part of that listening, that coaching, that mentoring piece has been great because I can be calm and listening and responding and guiding. But at the end of the day, I'm going to walk away caring so much about that human that's the part that has been debilitating. But I have learned coming from the classroom to the role that I am at is that, everything you're doing on a day-to-day basis as an educator, the decisions you're making every minute to try to share learning, understanding people's differences of where they're at that day. Maybe they're just having a bad day, or maybe something happened the night before. Maybe they forgot their lunch and it's nutrition. And I think when you presume positive intentions on everything, just like you mentioned, in terms of educators trying to learn who may feel overwhelmed, it's not resistance. So I will always take that stance, sometimes to a fault, and to be able to say, okay, this is where they're coming from. And then, at very least, if things go, say, okay, let's revisit this. It's okay to say we're going to put a pin in this and revisit it in 24 hours after we've been able to sort of calm our brain. So I think a lot of the skill sets coming from the classroom, being able to listen and understand, and then all of a sudden being in a leadership position was huge.
And I'm going to take that calmness that you're bringing right now and try to ruffle it up a little bit with another game here called Flip the Script. So I'm going to give you a limiting statement. And what I want you to do is turn it into an empowering truth. We're going to try to take the negative and put our best positive spin on it, okay?
Yeah, love it.
Okay, technology is making us more distracted than ever.
Because we're allowing it to.
And how would you flip it to make a positive statement about technology there?
Technology has the power to make us better than ever. If we don't change the way we are using it, it will be a distractor.
Wellness and productivity can't coexist.
Wellness and productivity absolutely go hand in hand with the right permissions and skill sets.
Innovation only works for the tech savvy.
Innovation is allowed to those that feel that they can find themselves in it.
People don't like change. It's better to always move slow.
Change is relative to everyone and their own perspective. Change management is always going to be at the forefront of every discussion.
And AI is replacing educators, not empowering them.
AI can replace some educators in some instances if they are not willing to embrace it.
There we go. And I would add to that one and say AI will only replace you if you're already bad at your job. Because
True, yeah.
if you have a human-centered job, AI cannot do the human connection better than you. And if it can, you probably had very bad human connection to begin with. So, and that would just be the reality of where we're at right now. Last question here for Headwinds and Tailwinds, Bill. What's something you had to unlearn about productivity that made you a better human?
For myself, I think it's always needing to have the answer right in that moment, and then understanding that you're able to revisit it. And sometimes it's triaging what you need for tomorrow morning. Like, will the sun come up? Or even though it's the sun, some will say, well, it's behind the clouds. Well, it's still there. You know what? There just may be clouds in front of it, and that may be how we're feeling versus this week or this month. So I think an instance something comes across, it's 4:30 in the afternoon, and do we need to communicate that with our colleagues, or can it be tomorrow when we see them, or can it be on Monday when we have a team meeting? So I think that the ability to communicate and keep everybody in the know, but to know when and where to do that, because you don't want anybody not to be in the know if something's happening. I think I had to unlearn my ability to over communicate almost, because you're trying to make sure that people are respected in what they need to do, but also not, I guess, throwing so much information that is unneeded.
You know, one of the things that I've learned in creating this show and moving into the realm of principalship, doing some of my own research in the field, is that it doesn't matter as much about what it is you're saying, but it's how you deliver it to people and the tone in which you deliver it to people. What's often forgotten in that is something you just mentioned, which is also the email that needs to be sent, which is also the staff meeting that needs to be had, which is also the parent you have to phone, the employee you need to talk to. The delivery on that, the timing of it, is going to change the impact of the message you're sending as well. That message that goes out at 5 p.m. on a Friday before the long weekend, no one's going to take that seriously on the Tuesday when they come back. But if that's coming out Tuesday morning, urgent, needs attention now, everyone's going to shift to that as soon as they open that inbox email in the morning. So I appreciate the insight you shared on that. We're going to go from the adversity we faced to, we kind of give a hint on how to action a change there. So let's dive into our third elemental segment and let's get into ripples of change. Let's talk about yours. You led a district-wide change in the age of AI. Bill, what did you learn about how people feel about technology?
I learned that everybody uses it. One thing that we had no data on before the pandemic was how much technology and what technology was in the hands of our students across our district at home. Obviously, we didn't visit them, but in terms of what we needed to provide the students, when we're saying as an equity stance, what devices were they using at home? Did they have phones? Did they have internet? That type. You got a better appreciation of the diversity of our district. So I think that was one big piece when we went into the pandemic, was kind of understanding who we serve, and I think that's a huge piece to it. So jumping to the age of AI, when the pandemic occurred, again, to backtrack, was that our board was situated in an instance where we just had to pivot. We had foundational skills. We had people that were mostly comfortable with technology and the tools, because we were narrow in what we wanted them to use and bring forward. So jumping to AI, we now had to take that and jump in a certain way. But immediately we had leadership that was willing to jump in, to learn about it, and to lead. And so for us, it's always been that culture for us across here in Ontario, Canada, where we were able to bring that forward and help other school boards. And that just starts with the people that we're trying to get into the board office. You don't need to be the one who knows how to code everything on a computer, but you have to be willing to show all those competencies. Say, I understand technology, but I also understand how to be a customer service agent in one way, how to quell how they are feeling in that moment. So when we're going out and being all acknowledging that there are elephants in the room when we talk about plagiarism, we can't just say, oh, let's change assessment practices overnight, and then we don't have to worry about plagiarism and so forth. And so it can't be as simple as that. So you're right, the delivering of a message, and sometimes that message not necessarily being in a digital format, right? And so getting that human back, going and visiting all the schools and trying to meet with all the English literature teachers at a high school who are battling this on a day-to-day. So for us, I think at our district, the ability to jump in and say, we're going to create these principles, and they're going to be adapted. It's not going to be perfect yet, but we're jumping in, and we are creating these situations, and we're not going to be afraid, and we're not going to wait around to see if a government organization or a federation or a ministry is going to guide us. I think that's huge in culture.
With that, what I'm hearing is, to make this change successful, you put boots on the ground and you were actively involved in the change process. How long did it take to see a payoff from what you guys were doing?
And I think, there's so many angles in there, because there's difference between having a checkbox saying we visited a school. And we visited multiple schools. That's definitely a positive when you can get a human there to be part of it and hear the concerns, and not just be somebody who's coming in just to tell you that everything's going to be okay. So I think for us, we used the November 2022 to June to really just get our guiding principles together, focusing on what is learning in the age of AI was the big focus. So going into the next school year, we called it our year of learning. So that we had to really just understand everything about it. We had to consult with all our parents and try to get students and feedback. We had to try to look at the tools that we were providing them. We had to look at definitely what policies and procedures were looking like, and ultimately decided not to create a policy because our policies that included responsible use of technology existed. So we kind of identified that AI, as much as it is important, it's going to flow through everything that we're doing already. So we didn't see it as an island where we had to just create. Of course, we had to name it. We had to look at our assessment and evaluation committee and documents and nomenclature. And I think the ultimate idea was we just got into as many schools as we could to listen, to show examples of how they could be using it as, in this case, a productivity piece, but also learn about what they were already doing. When we say our students are already using AI, well, our educators are already using AI. So we were very fortunate to start using it, and through a different conglomeration, develop use cases from every role across our school board. And so to try to see themselves on how is somebody using it, because there's a difference between a respected colleague from the school board, but you're still the district, you're still the school board suggesting something. When they can start seeing use cases of how their own colleagues are using it, was where we went into it. So that has been an ever-evolving journey. So I'd say a year and a half to get to that point where we were ready last September, it would be 2024, I guess, to say there's a year of implementation and really what that looks like to change the game.
And I think you alluded to it a little bit here. What made it so successful is this action steps that you took to make that transition. Because I've seen the opposite side in some places where they say, no, we need to have new policies. We need to put new documents in place to regulate AI versus looking at what do we already have? How do we change it to address it? But then let's focus on actually how we're going to use it and move forward with it, because it's not going away. It's going to stay forever. And if anything, it's going to become more prevalent and it's going to be easier for everyone to access as we go through. So how do we create that space? You're not the only one in the boardroom. Within that board, how did that come about to say, you know what, we're not going to focus on just the policies behind it, and we're going to focus on how we're going to action our teachers with it?
It just comes back to the culture we had. So I can't speak to other boards, but when we are meeting regularly with our director of education, our superintendent, depending where you are in North America, so director in Ontario, is part of those meetings with us, with our superintendent, who would be my my superior, my mentor, my boss, so to speak, and then all meeting with like regularly, weekly, those meetings, and then just ultimately bringing everybody together and say, we spent 2 days intensively all together. Like we had to risk reward the time on, because everybody has emails to answer, everybody has figurative fires happening at schools that we need to deal with, but the intentionality of dealing with it as a priority, like nobody's saying no to the meeting, right? Like everybody's going to be in the room, whether it's from communications, whether it's from special education, student services, finance, and then of course all our education arms. We're going to be in that room and say, okay, what do we need to do, and let's do it. And so part of it was guiding principles, part of it was a website, part of it was messaging, part of it was this, but it had to be a whole district. It could not be that. And I would say, going back to the example of almost like a whack-a-mole, when you have the game, an arcade game, and you're just trying to hit so many things, you almost had to like cover up 5 of them. Not to say that the game you wouldn't get more by hitting those 5, but you had to really focus on the main ones, understanding that you're still naming the other ones, but you really, if we start here and had a flow of where we wanted to get to over time, it was worth the weight in gold into year 2, because maybe you didn't do it as intensively. You named it, you recognized it, but you didn't put all your energy towards it at that point in time, because it can be so dispersed in 25 different ways. Then you're not accomplishing anything.
What I'm hearing from that, Bill, is if somebody is wanting to enact policy, wanting to create more documents around this, it's maybe a sign that they're feeling overwhelmed about it and they need to talk about it more, because they don't necessarily understand it themselves. So they have to take on that learning. And you can do that as a group and say, here's what we're getting into, here's what we're thinking, here's what we're going to allocate time to, just as you shared. And so it's great to see that you guys had that good dynamic. I know that in my workplace, we have that good dynamic, but every now and then we'll see those questions come up of what are we going to do about this? And most often than not, it ends up working itself out, because we talk through it and what do we need to do? What does it look like? What do we want it with the end? What's our vision with it? Does it align with our values? With that, we're going to get in. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, and I don't perceive to know everybody's district and what their policies exactly say. At the forefront of when we were looking at it, we just knew how cumbersome changing a policy was. And to go through, like, if a cycle every 6 months, every year, like every 2 years, to be able to say, to keep a policy updated just didn't seem like it would be responsive enough. So we did look at policies in terms of what existed, like you're saying, but for some districts and for some school boards it might make sense, but in the moment and right now at the rate at which AI is changing, it did not make sense for us, and a lot of, I think, different districts and school boards have followed suit.
Absolutely. We haven't gotten into our elemental game yet for our ripples of change, and so we're going to do some quick tips here where I'm just going to ask a question, and in the shortest piece of time, shortest phrasing possible, I want your practical advice for the situation, okay?
Okay.
What's one micro habit that protects your digital wellness?
Putting the phone in a different room at bedtime.
What's the fastest way to turn overwhelm into clarity?
Deep breathing.
What's the quickest way to spark curiosity in a skeptical group?
lots of questions that connect with that specific user or group.
What's one move that makes people feel safe taking a risk?
Sitting beside them instead of in front of them.
And what's one small action to make innovation a part of culture?
Permission within confines and specificity in terms of safety and security, but permission that to be creative and innovative.
There we go. And talking about risks, we are going to dive into our final elemental segment. Let's get in to Spark or Burn. A spark that ignites success or burns lessons into our memory. Bill, what's the boldest decision you've made that scared you but had to be done?
Well, I think I'll bring it to a personal level right now, is that I just finished my term as the coordinator of learning technologies at the Ottawa Catholic School Board, and I had a decision to make. I love the culture of the school board. I think that's been pervasive through this conversation. I love my colleagues. I even grew up as a student in the school board. I didn't want to teach anywhere else. I only applied to the school board. But knowing in the moment, if you're asking, say, and I won't use it as a risk because I have every confidence in the decision, but I decided to move on from being in my leadership position and being day-to-day at the school board by jumping into an independent consulting ed tech business. And a lot of people say that's a leap of faith. And I think that from surface value, it is. You're changing who you're working with and the organization you're working with on a day-to-day. But in terms of the skill sets that I've learned through that, I owe everything to working at the school board from an education standpoint, but also a leadership standpoint. So I've been loving that piece, but to me, that's a big jump. To a lot of people, that's a big jump. And I've valued every moment that I've had in that board, but I'm loving every minute that I'm now in terms of knowing what I don't know. I think that's the ultimate thing. There's a challenge here to make it.
And it's been a reoccurring theme on the podcast to talk about this, but when you bet on yourself, it's never a bad bet. And so to take it into your own hands, I think is a very empowering thing. With that, there's obvious fears around, what's going to happen to my income, what's going to happen to my benefits, what is that going to look like? If you put yourself with a good enough safety net and you believe in what you're doing, you can get there, and those things will come over time. And I think the smart way to do it is the way that you've kind of described it, is you've built that experience around it, and now you're jumping into that world. When did you realize tech wasn't just a tool, but something rewiring our thinking?
I think I've never thought of it as that, so it wasn't to me a realization. But I think in terms of my sharing of learning, that I've been more, even from the classroom, saying I'm going to use it purposefully, I'm going to use it intentionally for this, not just to use technology further or more. I think the SAMR model of substitution, and just thinking about why would we use a computer instead of this, like why would we go through the hassle, whereas now I think we're going through, not just before it was like how do we get set up and how do we do all this, so the time on in the class of just students do it, but now if there's one-to-one, if there's anything, like what are we doing with it? And so I'm really cognizant of adding more screen time into it. But for me, just like anything, you're building a house, you have a hammer, that the ability to use it obviously for its intention or not is there. So I've never thought anything different. I thought it's always something like, just like a math manipulative in my classroom, that's a tool. Using it when they're, and then also having the students say, I'm doing this math problem, can I use that? Teaching them how to advocate for themselves, to say, I would like to use this to help support my learning. And sometimes it could be just using the voice feature. Sometimes it could be a way of sharing their thinking. So to answer your question, I've never thought of tech more than just being a tool, as opposed to being everything and realizing it's a sometimes thing.
It's a great answer, and I would expect that to come from a tech consultant that's transitioned to that role. You know what? Let's lay down the foundation of your new venture by playing our last elemental game here. We'll play final answer, so no explanations. You just have to pick one of a would you rather scenario, okay?
Sure.
Change mindsets or change systems?
Mindsets.
Build for today or design for tomorrow?
Design for tomorrow.
Empathy or efficiency?
Empathy.
More creativity or more consistency?
Creativity.
Vision or execution?
Vision.
AI copilot or human instincts?
Human instincts.
And now I got to ask this one, AI copilot or ChatGPT?
Oh my gosh. Well, to me, it's really hard for me, I guess, to be honest, in this role. I know I'm explaining now, going down the explanation route, because everybody just like calling tissues Kleenex. A lot of people still call ChatGPT as everything we're talking about in terms of a large language model. So I will not say, I'll say AI engine, because it sounds more generic.
There we go. Blow the system up. And for those that aren't familiar with AIs, these are large language models, right? So Copilot is, I believe, Microsoft's, and Gemini is Google's, and OpenAI is, OpenAI's, right? So there's just different large language models to it.
Got it.
And I was asking him to pick one.
I know. And I that's where I was going down, and I was just going to say AI Copilot as AI kind of thought partner. Well, yeah.
There we go. Okay. Big impact fast or lasting impact slow?
Lasting impact slow.
Clarity or curiosity?
Clarity.
Build a tool or build trust?
Trust.
Redesign education or redesign leadership?
Redesign education.
Why do you say that?
Because I think systemically, if there is a lot of barriers to allow leaders to do what they need to do, whether it's from governance, whether it's from ministries, whether it's from unions, there's a lot of buts. There's a lot of just overarching pieces where we're talking about the teacher burnout. And I think for us, we can keep on trying to do what we need to do with this case, but at one point it's going to be capped. So I think we need to really look at education as a whole, as a system.
Bill, tell me more about how your new venture is helping with the decision-making process around technology.
Well, I think ultimately people convinced me, I'm very humble, people convinced me that I still have a lot to offer. And so therefore the realization that, you know what, I'm gonna listen to that. And I think that where it comes in, that permission piece, like I really truly did listen towards what it is. But I think ultimately people ask me, well, what are you trying to accomplish with this? And I say, I know I can do the professional development, and I can do it well, and I can support that. So I can go to the classroom, I can go to a district, and I can support learning different tools intentionally and purposefully. I know I can do that. I know I can support districts in their thinking about implementation on a leveraging digital front. I know I can do that. I'm not saying I'm the perfection of this. I'm just saying I know I can do it because those are my roles. But one thing I haven't done was things that, aren't moving forward, that don't have an answer. And that's what's really sparked this. So the digital literacy, coming from media literacy, from digital citizenship, all those things, what does that look like flowing through it? So some of these areas don't have answers, and that's what sparked me to say, okay, even adding to the conversation about that risk of me taking time off here is like, you're taking time off to go find something that doesn't really have an answer. I'm like, yep. And so for me, that's the main piece, is how do we get into that digital wellness, that balanced, humane use of tech. And so I think that's where that drives me, but I get to do that through every other facet of working with it. And I'm also getting to work with pre-service teachers at the local university here who are in their quote unquote teachers college, but it's a faculty of education, and working with them who are now getting into their practicum experiences, like getting them understand what the relationships with parents are like, things we never talked about necessarily in our education coming up, about that take a lot of your time outside of just teaching the students.
And, we say it like, oh, we're going to take time off to look for something we don't have an answer to. That's exactly what a sabbatical is as a university professor, right? They're taking time off to conduct research to move the needle forward so that they can learn more about the world. So I appreciate that. Bill, this is a good time to ask, if people want to get in touch with you to, maybe seek your consultation, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, definitely I'll be able to share, and we'll be able to put up there. But my company name is edtechpartner.com. And so it's an educational consulting incorporation. And so just www.edtechpartner.com. If people are on LinkedIn, I'm very active on there as well, which would get you to that point. But very collaborative. I'm always open to learn. So if people are connecting this or want to ask questions or get in contact, even just from a professional learning standpoint. But of course, if there are opportunities to support you in your district, definitely happy to bridge those conversations too.
All of that will be linked in the show notes of the description on this show as well. Bill, Perfect. One of the things that I've added to this show is that our previous guest will leave our next guest a question without knowing who they are or what they bring. So I'll share with you the question, and then as tradition continues, I'll ask you to leave a question for our next guest. The question left for you is hard work the answer to completing who you want to be?
I would say hard work has everything to do with it. It doesn't mean that you're doing everything perfectly. It just means that you are committed to it and you are ready to put in what's necessary and pivot and do what is needed to get to where you're at. I think there's a lot of times, whether you go back to my own education, where I was struggling with grades, but that wasn't based on ability. The ability was that I was failing to kind of put myself in that one. And I'm talking about like grade 5 and 6 and so forth. But the ability to say, okay, you dip. But there's a lot of things people can do just by going at it 100%. And what that will beat out people that will necessarily, just have the natural gift to do it. So you got to have that work ethic. And I think that's one thing I've instilled in my students and my kids. I have 3 boys that, being true to it, showing up, no matter what is there, showing up and bringing for it and facing things as they come is ultimately what I'm driven by.
And for yourself, who you want to be, is hard work the answer?
Who I want to be? I want to be somebody who is trusted. I want somebody who's respected as somebody who's kind and who will be there in somebody's corner no matter what. And that ultimately, back to the human element, is that when something is needed, whether it's at a human level or a job or professional level, they will reach out. They feel comfortable in reaching out. So I think that's where my journey starts in my own career. The ability to do this pivot into educational technology consulting is because I've developed relationships for many, many years across these fields, and therefore it seems natural.
And Bill, what question would you like to leave my next guest?
Yeah, I think we're going to kind of summarize our conversation, which is really about where does humans and empathy fit into all of this? I think how do we go from talking about it to putting it into action?
I'm just typing it out here.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Where does humans and empathy fit into the world we live in, and how do we put it into action? Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, and I think it would be obviously tailored to whatever angle they're coming from. So not necessarily the world, it could be their vocation, it could be their specific role but everything. But yes.
Oh yeah, we have no idea what they're going to bring to the table.
And we don't know who it is.
That's
so very
the beautiful
generic.
part of it.
I love it. Yeah.
If you could leave the listeners with one thought, one thing, one hope, one ripple forward from this conversation, what would it be?
I would say, what are we going to do today about it? What are we going to do tomorrow about it? What are we going to do this week about it? What are we going to do this month and so forth in this year? Because if we don't start doing anything at a micro level, then all of a sudden it will be the holidays, it will be next summer, and then we're just that much more further on. So it all starts with those baby steps to kind of gain forward.
Thanks for sticking around to the end of the show. If you have feedback, a suggestion, or just want to start a conversation, fire off an email to tyler@elementaleducator.com. I actually read them. And if this episode sparks something, leave a review on Apple or Spotify. It helps more leaders find the show. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. where I put out additional content. I'll see you next time, same place.